If you're dragging clips onto the timeline or you're editing using MP4s or MP3s, then it's taking you twice as long to create an edit, meaning you're earning half as much for twice the work. I've mentored dozens of self-taught video editors who were making these mistakes, plus tons more that you're going to learn in this episode. All those editors have seen the speed of their editing improve by implementing the techniques in this episode. So how do you improve your workflow to edit as fast as a pro? How much time do you actually save? And how much more could you earn if you implement a professional workflow? Hello, splicers. Welcome to the video editing podcast from Unsplice. On this show, you'll hear industry secrets and practical tips to help video editors and teams create better commercials, reels, and documentaries faster, so that you can earn more money from the same amount of work. I lay bare my 15 years industry experience as a documentary and commercial editor for clients like Vice, BBC, Ogilvy, and more, so that you can learn from my lessons and edit like a pro in a third of the time. Now let's talk about a typical self-taught video editor's workflow. Now, quite often it'll start with dragging the footage into the project window. You just drag it in from the folder. And then once you've got it all laid out, when you start to build out the timeline, you're just going to be dragging in those MP4s, dragging in those MP3s. And well, things go well at first. Nothing seems to be any problem. There's a little bit of lag when you drag the playhead across, especially if you're trying to play backwards using the J key. But then you start adding a few more layers, a few more video layers, a few more effects. There's a pause when you start to hit play and you have to render just in order to watch stuff back. Export times start taking ages and you dread having to make any changes because there's a lag when you want to play it back. And so you render every single time that you want to move any frame forward or backwards. You start getting error messages as well when you're exporting. Those are the worst, and things at that point simply just become frustrating. Changes take longer than you need. You start getting annoyed. You start blaming the machine or the software. So many times I hear people blaming Premiere Pro for being slow or laggy or whatever. The client gets annoyed at you and they start blaming you for the slow progress. And then you just get relieved when the project is over and hope that the next one gets better. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. So if you want a super smooth editing experience, then you're going to have to implement a professional workflow. Now, there are 3 keys to a professional workflow, and they are, number 1, the speed of your machine. This is the first one that everyone thinks of when things are going a little bit slow. They think, oh, my machine's a bit slow. Key number 2 is the speed of you, the editor. And key number 3 is the speed of changes, the speed of your response to changes. So when feedback comes in, client wants some changes, how quickly can you turn around those changes? And that all comes down to a lot of prep work. So I'm going to break down these keys for you. By the way, I'm going to try a new technique. We're going to be writing on a whiteboard. I think it's going to help some of these lessons land a little bit better. And I really love to know if you find it useful, then I'll continue to do it. Now, if you're listening on the podcast without the video, then you can check out the video and learn some of these lessons. If you want these lessons to stick, then I highly recommend checking out the video version of this as well after you finish listening to this. Seeing it written down just helps the ideas stick. So I really encourage you to do that. And let me know in the comments on YouTube what you think of this new format. Let's start with number 1, the speed of your machine. Now, when you interact with your machine, how fast does it respond? So it's not quite simply, what is the computer spec? That's not what we're talking about here. The key to a faster workflow really is about when you interact with your machine, how fast does it respond? So that comes down to technical workflow. Technical workflow is one of those things that self-taught editors completely lag. And there's no real lessons out there on YouTube, except for here with Unsplice. So technical workflow and computer components. You probably be thinking most of it is computer components, but the majority of your speed, the speed of your machine, comes from this first one, technical workflow. You can work on a very, very slow machine if you have perfect technical workflow. Let's break down technical workflow a little bit more. Technical workflow includes your file formats. What file format is the asset in? And when you think about the assets, there are 3 different states of an edit, or 3 different states of a production. From the moment that footage gets captured, that's the first step. It becomes an image, it becomes a video file, it becomes a file that you can work with as an editor. Without that, there's nothing. So that is the first stage. That is the raw file format. The next stage is a working format. So from that point, the raw is when it comes straight out of the camera, straight onto a hard drive. It's very heavy. It's the biggest file size it's ever going to be. It's got the most information, and you need all of that, especially when it comes to the color grade. But during the editing process, it's actually too much information. We don't need all of that. All we're trying to do is craft the story, and we need smooth playback. So we need to make sure that all of our assets are in a working format. So if anything is raw and it's too heavy for our machine, which given that everything shoots at 4K pretty much now, there's a high likelihood that it's too much for your machine, unless you've got a very, very expensive machine. So you want to make sure that everything is in a working format, because working format is specifically for working as an editor, working in post-production. And then the final stage of your formats is delivery. When you've done your editing, when you worked on that sequence, you send it out to the client for review, for feedback, or maybe even once it's finished, you export it and it goes out for final delivery. That is a delivery format. So remember what we said earlier about MP4s and MP3s? Well, those are typically delivery formats. They are highly compressed and they are meant specifically to be read forwards and not backwards. So if you try to play them backwards or you try to move the playhead around, the compression of that file does not work that way. It does not play backwards. So that's why it's causing so much lag. Those are the file formats. You want to make sure that everything that you are working with is in a working format. Super important. So by converting something from one format to another, that is the act of transcoding. So you need to make sure that you are transcoding everything into a working format. Also, proxies. If you are working with proxies, then your workflow is going to be so much faster and so much smoother, especially like we were talking about earlier, if you're working with 4K assets. If you're working with proxies, you can work with a terrible machine. You can work with a slow machine and it's going to work. So proxies are another really important part of your technical workflow if you want to increase your editing speeds. These will prevent lag. If you want to prevent lag, then you have to follow this. And that is what is slowing you down so much. It's tiny microseconds, but when every time you want to click something or move something, you're getting a bit of lag or play something back, it all adds up to many, many, many minutes over the course of a day. You also want to keep an eye out for VFR, which stands for variable frame rates. Variable frame rates are the devil, and they will cause your machine, your editing software, to crash. Variable frame rates are quite often a frame rate adopted when you're filming on a phone. The reason for this is because the actual processors on the phone itself can't handle sometimes the speed at which the camera is recording. Let's say you're recording at 30 frames per second. Well, what it'll do is it'll kind of get around about 30 frames. So you might end up with a frame rate of something weird like 29.99 frames per second. And if your editing software is looking for a 30 frames per second video and it finds 29.99, it's going to bug out and crash. That is why you don't want to use variable frame rate. And so that means you need to transcode VFR. The other thing is your audio channel prep. If you're dealing with assets that have 8 channels of audio, that's a lot to handle. And if it's all raw media in WAV format, then you might be just making life super, super difficult for yourself. So make sure that you are working in only the channels that you need to, and just make your life easy in that sense. And the other part of technical workflow, which is going to speed up your work, is your sequence settings and your export settings. So your sequence settings should be, if you need to keep the end in mind, all right? What is the film going to be? You could have tons of assets in tons of different frame rates because that's just the way that video editing works these days. You can find videos online. You might get stuff from in-camera. You might get stuff from an old campaign or an old video that the client wants to put in. And these can be in tons of different frame rates. So you need to make sure that you're working in the frame rate that is correct for the final output. And you need to make sure that you're working in HD if you need to export in HD. Because if you're working in 4K, it's going to cause you to slow down. It's going to cause you a ton of pain in the ass. And when it comes to exporting, if you're trying to export in 4K, then it's going to take more than twice as long. It's 4 times the information. It's not double. It's 4 times the amount of information in 4K compared to HD. So make sure that you are creating the sequence settings and the export settings that are the maximum that you need and no more. If you create any more, it's going to slow down your machine. It's going to be a pain in the ass to edit. So sequence and export settings. Super, super important. If you want a little bit of clarification, good news. In the next episode, we're going to go a deep dive onto technical workflow. So keep that in mind. I hope you enjoy this new format of writing. That is technical workflow, the first part. Now, let's talk about your computer components. Your computer components consist of this list that we're going to run through now. And you just want to make sure you don't actually need the best. You don't need the maximum. You just need good enough. Your CPU. CPU, just if you buy a computer built in the last 5 years, you're laughing. It's fine. You don't have to worry about any of this. If you're dealing with something a little bit older, then your CPU will need to be fairly robust. Your GPU, if you're going to be working on any graphics, anything heavy like that, GPU really helps with rendering, with your render settings. So a faster GPU means faster render times, but not really essential. Like you don't need the top of the line. Your RAM, that is what you're going to need to just do stuff on the fly. All of the stuff that you render on the timeline is going to be stored in your RAM. So when you play it back, you'll need a decent amount of RAM. You'll need at least 8 gig of RAM. SSD, solid state drive. If you're working on a hard drive, the one that whizzes up and makes a noise, that's super slow. You need a solid state drive to work from directly, and you need a super fast cable to connect to your machine. That is a really simple fix. That's easy, and whatever you buy, you can take it with you. So you don't have to worry about upgrading your machine. That's going to be the fastest upgrade on that list, as in you can spend the least amount of money and see immediate results. If you're working from a hard drive, switch to SSD. And finally, your settings. Software settings, software version. If you're working in Premiere Pro, never work on the latest one. You always want to work on the software that's the last year, the latest version of the last year. Why? Because it has the most updates, it's the most stable. The latest version is the most buggy. You know, they're constantly updating, they're trying to fix those bugs, right? But the latest version of the previous, that is generally speaking the most stable. So that covers the speed of your machine. Now let's talk about the speed of you. So how can you improve the speed of you? Well, first things first. The faster you are on the keys, the less you can use the mouse, the faster editor you are going to be. You want to get into that muscle memory as much as you can so that you can edit using the mouse as little as possible. The mouse is a very, very slow tool to edit with. That's why editing programs like Avid are very much keyboard focused, because it's faster. It is faster. So you really, really want to make sure you nail those. If you're looking for some help with that, you can get a free PDF. That is all of the keyboard shortcuts that I use, all of the basics, all the more advanced ones, and the super fast ones that I use that save me the most amount of time. Head to unsplice.com/keys to pick up your free PDF with all those keyboard shortcuts that I use for Premiere Pro. The other thing that can improve your speed as an editor: tools and plugins. Tools and plugins. Now, this is one of those things that you hear a lot of creators, they try to sell you tools, plugins, extra, LUTs. Most of them are junk and they don't actually save you much time, but there are some valuable ones out there, some really, really good ones that can actually cut your time down. So keep an eye out for ones that aren't gimmicky and automate the process of applying something. There are sound libraries out there where you can just browse it as an application. You just browse it and just click it, listen to it, and it'll drop it into your Premiere Pro or your Final Cut, or whatever timeline. Those are the kind of tools that you're looking for. Stuff that automates stuff. LUTs, transitions, effects, those are not time savers. Those are just little bows that you might put on a gift that are there to make your edit appear a bit more flashy. You're looking for time-saving tools. Now, we can talk about that in another episode. And finally, your peripherals. That is your mouse. I know we said that the mouse is the slowest tool to use, but you still need to use it. And so you want something that is really, really ergonomic and great. I'm a big fan of a Wacom tablet or something similar. Really, really fast way to interface with everything. I love using my Wacom, and I find that if I'm using a mouse too much, then I get aching joints all over my hand. And a Wacom helps prevent that. Likewise, with your mouse, make sure you get something ergonomic, because you are going to be spending a lot of time with it. So make sure you get something that's super, super comfortable. And finally, your keyboard. You can have a faster keyboard. I know it might sound a little strange, but you can. I love working with ergonomic keyboards, but if you are starting out and you're learning the software, then I recommend something pretty special. This is a keyboard designed specifically with Premiere Gal, and these are the Premiere colors, and all of the shortcuts are on the keys. So if you are just starting out, this is a super, super useful tool. This is going to help you speed up your workflow no end. As you're trying to learn all the keys, I highly recommend something like this. And I love the look of this. It lights up. You can program the Bluetooth, so you can have 3 different connections via Bluetooth. It's super cool. If you can see that there. I just love the way it looks, and I love the way it feels. So if you want to get your hands on one of those, I'll leave a link in the description in the show notes. But a keyboard like this is a great investment. That's going to speed up your workflow, especially as you figure out all the keyboard shortcuts. That covers the speed of you. Let's talk about the speed of changes. The speed of changes is quite literally how fast you can react to change requests from the client or even from yourself when you're looking at something going, that could be better. If you know that there's a ton of hoops that you need to jump through in order to improve that edit or find that thing that you know is going to make it better, then you're less likely to do it. And you're going to feel a lot more pain, a lot more anxious, just trying to get through that, and the idea of thinking about, oh, if I do that, then I have to do that, then I have to do that, that's going to slow you down and it's going to drain your joy of the actual edit. So we're now talking about what is called creative workflow. We've spoken about technical workflow. Now we're talking about creative workflow. That is your organization, your folder structure, your naming conventions, all the bins, the bin structure within your editing software, string outs, all really, really important ways of just organizing your footage so that you know when you need to look for something, you know exactly how to find it, and you can do that really, really quickly. Organization of your project and all of your assets is really, really important, as is the order that you build and edit. There is such a thing as an optimum order to build and edit. You should be building an edit and not destroying. What do I mean by that? Well, when you pull stuff onto a timeline, you are adding to a sequence. You're building one thing after the next. But how a lot of people, especially if they're self-taught, like to edit is by starting with a long timeline full of stuff, perhaps has all the footage that you need, and then you start pulling stuff out. You start extracting, deleting stuff, going so that you feel like you're left with only the best stuff. Or what happens is you have essentially then just a timeline of selects. This is just a bunch of good stuff, but there's no rhyme or reason to the order that they are. And you are increasing your cognitive load by doing that. Now, to make that more optimum, you need to build rather than destroy. Think about every clip that's going on. Okay, I'm going to add on this clip onto the timeline. What is the next logical clip that should follow on from this? Find that clip, put it on. Okay, what's the next logical clip that should follow on from this? Pull that on. Now you have the beginnings of an edit rather than a massive jigsaw puzzle that you have to move stuff around. No, you're building something that actually, with every single clip, works with the last one, and it has a purpose and a reason. It's so much faster, it's so much more efficient, and you're creating with intent. And that is key as an editor. Rather than throwing spaghetti at a wall, which is very much like how you would be if you were just deleting stuff, taking stuff out, you are building with intent, and it's so much faster, so much quicker. And you also need to find the best footage quickly. If you want to improve the speed of changes, you need to have everything built so that you can find the best footage as quickly as possible. Have a system so that everything is labeled and everything is stored in the most optimum organizational structure for you. And everyone's different. So whether you keep everything in a scene by scene structure, maybe you break things down by emotion, maybe you break things down by the things in there. Maybe there's indoor and outdoor scenes. However you think, and it will probably change from project to project, however you think is going to be the most optimal way, that is exactly how you need to structure your project so that you can find exactly what you need as quickly as possible. By the way, if you found this information really, really useful, hit subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. It helps the channel grow and more people find it. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. So if you were to implement everything that we've spoken about, then you are going to end up with the best editing workflow. If you implement these, I have seen this, and I've done this with tons and tons of students. I've mentored students through these workflow gains, and I've seen the speed of their editing increase, minimum double the speed. Some people I've seen start cutting 3 times. And this is an exponential thing. You know, it's gradually increases over time. If you've heard of 1% incremental improvements, this is exactly that. Think of one thing, improve that one thing, until it becomes second nature. Then move on to the next thing. Keep rewatching or re-listening to this episode and keep picking up each thing, improving that one thing, and then move on to the next. Those 1% increases will compound over time, and you will find that even if you get double the speed within 1 month, less, 2 weeks. I've seen editors implement some of the most basic ones of these, get twice as fast in a week or 2 weeks. But the more you implement, the faster you're going to get over time, and you'll look back on how you used to do things and you'll laugh. That means that you can earn 2 to 3 times more for the same amount of work because you're able to work so much faster. That means you could clock off early. That means you can juggle 2 jobs at the same time. That means you can work for some of the higher paying clients, because those high paying clients, they expect efficiency. And if you want repeat work from those high paying clients, you got to be fast and you got to be good. So if you're good and you're not fast, they're not going to book you again. So you really want to make sure that you work on these, and you will find that these skills will help you earn 2 to 3 times more. That being said, if you want to earn 2 to 3 times as much, if you want to edit faster as quickly as possible, then I have some free resources for you. Head to unsplice.com/keys, and you can pick up a Premiere Pro keyboard shortcuts PDF, which will give you all of the keyboard shortcuts that I use. The basic ones, the more advanced ones, and the super fast ones that have me working so much faster. And if you would like even more help with your technical workflow, well, you better check out the next episode.